Hi, I'm Deb Flagan, Vice President of Hayden Homes. We are proud to sponsor the upcoming League of Cities panel discussion, City Strategies for Shelter and Housing Development. At Hayden Homes, we exist to give as you go, so together we can build a strong community and lead fulfilled lives. We accomplish this by helping hardworking families in small towns by giving of ourselves and our resources to provide essentials to create stability and allow families to flourish. We know housing affordability has reached a crisis point, and the burden often falls on the government to provide solutions for families struggling in your communities. Hayden Homes believes that the best, most effective solutions are developed in partnership with stakeholders who are highly invested in solving the housing crisis and are willing to share their knowledge. We applaud local governments who work hand in hand with organizations to create innovative policies and solutions that support a new wave of housing availability and affordability. Hayden Homes is proud to be partners with many of these cities. Today, we are excited to sponsor this panel discussion on the essential need of shelter in our cities throughout Oregon.
Good morning, and thank you for joining today's panel on city strategies for shelter and housing development. This session will feature on-the-ground examples from cities piloting new programs and strategies to address homelessness and encourage the development of needed housing. We're splitting this panel into two portions. So first, you will hear from the City of Medford, and we are so grateful to Medford City Councilor Kay Brooks and Deputy City Manager Kelly Matting for taking time away from the recovery process in Southern Oregon to share their experiences addressing homelessness and a new camping pilot in the City of Medford. Thank you both.
Thank you. Should we just go to the next slide?
Hi there, I'm Kay Brooks. So briefly, we're just going to go over some homelessness statistics and issues that are facing Medford. Next slide. So as you can see here in our point in time comparison, in 2020, we had 727 unhoused folks. That's slightly different than the past few years and is attributable to probably some of our programs that we've been doing and some of our outreach. Next slide. Here you can see some of our point in time count subpopulations, from chronically homeless to those with severe mental illness to those with chronic substance abuse. We have quite a few chronically homeless families, chronically homeless individuals, those with severe mental illness, and those with substance abuse. Next slide. We also have considerable amount of homeless veterans in our area and domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Many of those we've been able to get sheltered for homeless veterans. However, for domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, there is a considerable amount of unsheltered people. Next slide. So our housing count here, as you can see, we have rapid rehousing, emergency shelter beds, transitional beds, and permanent supportive housing at the top. This information is provided by the Jackson County Continuum of Care. And even though we do have this amount of bedding and this amount of housing, it's simply just not enough. Next slide. Despite the fact that we have 3,500 or nearly 3,500 affordable units at 50% AMI, as well as 719 affordable units at 30% AMI and 293 permanent supportive housing units, there's still a significant need of housing in Medford, which with at least over 1,000 households in Jackson County that are currently homeless. We also have one of the lowest rental vacancy rates in the country that hovers between 1% and 2% that will only be further exacerbated by the wildfires we've experienced here. Next slide. So we'll begin talking about Hope Village, which opened on Halloween in 2017. And this is our tiny house village that's in the city of Medford. So Hope Village is operated by one of our local community partners, Rogue Retreat. They've been instrumental in really getting up on the getting the ground running in terms of Hope Village and our urban campground, which we'll discuss later. So one of the ways that we were able to implement this is that the city had owned some surplus property, and an abutting property owner was able to lease the private property they owned to be able to create the tiny house village. We were able to zone it as urban campground. Previously, we were only allowed 2 urban campground designations per municipality. However, the legislature lifted that cap, and we're now allowed to have as many urban campground designations as we'd like. Next slide. So Hope Village here, you can see one of the units. It started with 7 duplexes, and 8 months later, we were able to double that to 15 duplexes, equaling 30 units total. And this was a collaborative project between multiple community partners, as you can see. One of the great things about Hope Village is that it's mostly self-governed. They have strict behavioral rules. They're required to contribute to the community itself through cleaning, through a monthly fee, and through doing rotating shifts on the gate watch. The village are also monitored by road retreat management staff, as well as a 24/7 camp host. And the residents maintain community agreements and are self-enforcing in those community agreements. And one of the biggest takeaways is that there's a large sense of mutual aid here, where people are helping one another access that upward social mobility. Next slide. So the services here that are provided, the structures don't have their own water and sewer. That's why they have the urban campground designation. They previously didn't have electricity as well. However, they now have electricity available from community partners providing solar panels on each tiny house. There are communal kitchens and communal bathroom trailers provide places to cook and clean. There's also a communal laundering unit, which is great because people really need to be able to launder their clothes to go to job interviews. Another instrumental part of the Hope Village project is that there's 2 on-site case managers once a week there. And the services include legal services, employment services, life coaching for transitioning back into society, substance use treatment, as well as many community partnerships that they can access for services. Next slide. So some of the successes of Hope Village is that in its approximate 3 years of operation, it served over 213 people, 87 of which have been able to transition into permanent supportive housing. There's been considerable community support for its implementation because of its track record of success. There was some initial backlash in the beginning in terms of people just kind of, NIMBYism in general. However, in its 3 years, it's only proven to be a success and hasn't really had any issues. And so now it has a lot of community support behind it. Other communities have also undertaken this project. Multiple municipalities have seen the successes here and have been following and implementing it in their own communities. Next slide. So here we'll talk a bit about the costs. For the initial 14 units in the other facilities, it was approximately $450,000 to initially set it up. Its operational costs are around $12,000 a month, and its current running total is approximately $650,000. There might be some ticket shock there. However, studies have shown that for every person who is living on the streets, it costs municipalities around $60,000 per individual. So when you look at this, it's actually incredibly fiscally conservative. Next slide. So some of the challenges that we'll talk about, this was the first project of our kind in our area. So there was a little bit of backlash and a little bit of reticence to be able to implement it. Finding the suitable location with the appropriate zoning, which was the urban campground. However, where will we put it? Our public works department luckily had excess land. And then also the city council's uncertainties around operational plans, the code requirements. A few adjacent property owners did object, but I think they're now on board. However, one of the biggest challenges we have now is that considering our current circumstances with wildfires, it's going to be very, very hard to find more permanent supportive housing with our rental vacancy rate as it was, and now losing over 3,000 houses to wildfires. There's going to be significant issues in terms of moving people into permanent supportive housing from transitional housing. Next slide. Okay, I'll give it over to Kelly to talk about our temporary homeless campground, our urban campground.
So our most recent endeavor is our COVID-19 temporary homeless campground that opened at the end of July. Next slide. During COVID, the beginnings, we were asking people, those unhoused people along our greenway, which is a bike path and park-like environment from Ashland that goes from Ashland to Center Point. We were asking them to stay on the greenway. When we moved out into phase 2 of COVID-19, Our police chief in particular believed that having a centralized campground would be beneficial to move people off the Greenway into a safe place. And so the city was able to find this proposed site. It was zoned general industrial, so it doesn't have a lot of residential use around it, which was a positive thing. Next slide. Rogue Retreat is the operator of this, like Hope Village, and we began with 25 tents. It was immediately a success. In fact, I think it was full on its second day. They've recently added 15 tents for a total of 40 tents. And the referrals are by the livability team, which is a team of our police officers. And for more information on them, you can give me a call, or the sheriff's department. Next slide. This was what the campground looked like in the beginning. It was very hot and dusty, and we put down some bark chips and got some canopies to help lessen that. Showers and laundry are off-site, and bathroom facilities and hand washing stations are on-site. There are a variety of social service agencies that come to this site every day and provide service to the people that are living there. And it's staffed 24 hours a day by 2 staff people, and then there's a camp host at night. Next slide. So the cost to run this right now is about $30,000 a month, and that's primarily because it's really staff heavy. I think that there is a chance that they could lessen the amount of staff that are there, because they originally thought that there would be more issue, and there really have not been any issues at this campground with people I guess having, negative behaviors. How it's being paid for is that there was some COVID-19 funding that our community came together at the beginning of COVID-19 for homeless services, and there was a little bit of that money left, and the city council has allocated $90,000 of our CARES Act funding to pay for this campground through the end of December. Next slide. So our successes are that in the last 2 months, this campground has served 125 people. It was estimated that there were about 150 people or more camping on the Greenway, and we've served 125, and 33 have transitioned to other Rogue Retreat temporary housing. Next slide. So here's our contact information. And please proceed with any questions you have.
Thank you to the City of Medford for sharing the work you're doing around shelter and addressing homelessness in Southern Oregon. Now we're going to shift our focus to maybe the other end of the housing spectrum and discuss more around the development of needed housing, and looking at hearing from the City of Coos Bay on what their needs are in terms of housing development and the tools that they're using and work they're doing to increase the supply of needed housing on the coast. The legislature in 2019 passed 2 landmark housing bills related to planning, House Bills 2001 and House Bill 2003. And Coos Bay is already hard at work doing some advanced planning and advanced work to implement those bills. And you'll hear from Councilor Drew Farmer and City Manager Roger Craddock as they share their work to implement those bills and, again, increase the supply of housing stock in Coos Bay.
So I guess to start out with, it would be appropriate to share our council who will be in attendance at in this session with the league. I think when we go back and look back at history, it's important to note that when things changed for us, and it really changed, and there have been lasting effects since the housing bubble burst in 2007, which has greatly had an impact on our housing stock. For Coos Bay, our experience was our constructions of new homes just stalled. They stopped altogether. There were a period of 2 to 3 years where we didn't even have a single housing start. And not unlike other places across the nation, we saw a huge increase in foreclosures. Some of those homes in foreclosure were vacant for months and some for years. In addition, we also saw that, and not related to the recession, some homes became uninhabitable, either due to a lack of maintenance or they were destroyed by fire. And then with the decrease in available housing stock, we saw an increase in the need for rental units, and that increased pressure, but the lack of housing caused an increase, that increased demand caused an increase in rental prices. And that probably goes back into some of Medford's work towards ending homelessness. It did have an effect on that.
So in an effort to entice development, the City Council placed a moratorium on system development charges. That was done around the same time that the housing bubble burst. Another thing that the city did is revise the permitting plan review process. It had taken generally 8 weeks prior to the revision to get a plan through. That was able to be reduced to 2 weeks. Coos Bay, in partnership with other cities in Coos County, the county, 2 tribal governments, and a number of nonprofits and interested community members collaborated in a community-led countywide housing analysis that took place in 2018. They had told us what we already roughly knew, is that we had much higher demand than we had housing stock. So one of the other things the city did is we undertook a much needed, long overdue review of and rewrite of the systems, the city's development codes allows for more mixed use. So.
I think predominantly on our old development code, it was primarily much of the original language from 1987. What we aimed to do was to provide a new review format, which was easier to follow by our citizens. We also wanted to delete many of the unnecessary reviews for some proposed uses. Some reviews were fairly simple in nature. They actually met the code, and it didn't require the long and exhausting process to go before the Planning Commission. The City of Coos Bay also had accumulated over the years more than 20 different zoning designations. That was reduced. I believe we're down to 14. And then lastly, in order to be compliant with state law, we wanted to provide clear and objective language for our applicants to follow.
In the process of all this, we also updated our urban renewal plans. The city undertook a process to evaluate and update the downtown urban renewal plan. That plan was originally established in 1987. In the updated plan, a goal of increasing housing within the district through the implementation of mixed zone uses was achieved, and a goal to try and develop the upper floors of some of the buildings downtown that had come to be underused, if used at all. The zoning has been updated to allow for mixed use, and the Urban Renewal Agency undertook a project to evaluate the number of buildings in the downtown area that were prime candidates for upper floor redevelopment. The evaluation included structural assessments and an identification of necessary code requirements, along with potential costs related to redevelopment, which made it smoother for developers that were interested because we had those facts on hand. Yep, that is the Buggy Bank building as it previously stood prior to some facade grant dollars. And I think the next slide will show what it came to be. So that was after the facade grant was implemented. Back in 2011, the city partnered with the former owner of the building and updated the facade, including replacing upper floor windows, repairing the stucco facade, and giving the building a new coat of paint. So it really made that corner stand out again. A new owner purchased the building and provided the upper floor redevelopment assessment conducted by the city. That owner found a long-term tenant who is willing to rent out the entire floor of apartments. Unfortunately, that individual wasn't able to find funding to make those developments, even though he had an occupant ready in mind. So what the Urban Renewal Agency was able to do for him, we were able to provide him gap financing for the construction of 11 new apartments, which was a great asset to the downtown. The gap financing also allowed him to provide the required life safety improvements to the building and address a faulty elevator that was in the building that needed to be brought up to date. Project has been completed, and OHSU will be using those 11 units for students in our area, which frees up 11 units of housing out in the community.
You know, and I know that we're going to be talking about House Bills 2001 and 2003, but I think you're probably saying that we're not there yet. But what we are sharing is some different steps that we took, maybe some non-traditional steps that we've taken in an effort to increase housing stock in Coos Bay. Another project that we're currently working on is redeveloping a former school site. This is the picture of the old Inglewood School. It's about 30,000 square foot structure, or at least it was. It was built in 1905 on a nearly 2-acre lot. It was sold by the Coos Bay School District to private ownership, after which it was rezoned into mixed use. And for a while, it served as the property owner's residence, at least up to 2005, when it mysteriously caught fire one night shortly after being foreclosed on. But there's nothing suspicious about that. This is what it looks like today. Just a burned out shell of the former building.
So, shortly after the 2015 fire, the owner abandoned the property and left the area, if not the country, without cleaning up what is now considered a brownfield site. County ended up foreclosing on the property due to non-payment of taxes. However, they didn't have the resources to clean up that land. So the city, county, and nonprofit have entered into an agreement. The city is going to mitigate the hazardous material. We're able to do that in part due to clean water dollars, because this property sits at the top of a hill, which the water flows down into the waterway. So because of the impact that brownfield has on the waterway, we're able to use clean water dollars to address the brownfield issue. When we do that, and the hazardous material is cleaned up by the city, our county, Coos County, has agreed to provide the property to the responsible nonprofit, who will then develop a low-income multifamily apartment complex on that site. Some of what else that we've been doing is just doing a reassessment of what lands we have that we don't necessarily have a use for. What does the city own that it can surplus? What you see here is a 5-acre plot. Developer bought it up, wants to build 12 homes there. I believe the next slide is 1.7 acres we were able to surplus off, and somebody wants to build a 4-plex there.
Back in 2017, Coos Bay, like many other areas of the state, we began looking at the Opportunity Zone designation. We worked with our regional economic development organization, and we advocated to the governor's office to be one of those designations. Opportunity zones do provide economically distressed community opportunities for private investments that can have certain tax benefits. We were awarded one, and shortly thereafter, a hedge fund came in and bought 70 acres worth of land within our community. They are also aware of the housing needs analysis and the fact that there was a huge demand for housing. They are proposing and actually have now permitted a 400 unit manufactured home park. This is going to go a long ways in meeting some of our pent up demand. To be honest with you, I don't think this property would have been developed if it wasn't for the Opportunity Zone. The estimated investment in this property is about $40 million. Just to bring the power to this lot was over $1 million. Wastewater, although we worked and tried to find different ways to get it there, the lease cost is still going to be close to $2 million. One of the side benefits of this that we found is that while the hedge fund is financing that first project, they brought in a developer from out of state. He's immediately fell in love with this area. And one of the benefits we found that he came in and he purchased 11 undeveloped lots in a platted subdivision, and he's already submitted his first project, which actually has been approved. In addition, the same developer bought roughly about 7 acres of prime land that overlooks the bay. And for those people that want to see planes land and fly away, he's planning to build a 13 unit subdivision there on higher end homes. I think we're starting to paint a picture that it's a combination of a number of different things that can affect the housing stock.
Yeah. And in those items, it should also be noted that community culture and staff culture played a huge role in facilitating these interactions with the developers. One of the things that's been cited time and time again by developers who are starting to work in our area is how easy it was to work with the city staff and how much they appreciated the support of the city council. And I think those two cultural aspects also play a huge role in promoting these developments. What we see on the screen right now is a property that the city had in surplus essentially. However, we took a different approach to this one. We put out a request for proposals, and whoever could meet what we were looking for in those proposals was just going to get the land for free as long as they could develop within a set period of time. And we had 2 responses to the request, and the one that won out is what you see here. It's going to be 9 units developed, I believe middle income housing, and they're well on their way working on this project. So one of the things Roger has said before is development drives development from time to time, and shortly down the street from that last slide is this slide, 6 units that are being developed. It'll be a multifamily housing under construction down there by one of our local business owners who happens to own some property and felt this was the right time to develop.
Not too far there. You know, for housing rehab, we talked earlier that some of our houses over a period of time have come out of the usable use of housing stock because of lack of maintenance. We were fortunate. We were able to partner with Coos County, the city of Reedsport, and a local nonprofit, and we secured a CDBG grant which will fund housing rehabilitation projects for approximately 25 homes for low-income families. We will be managing the program, but Umpqua Neighborhood Works will actually do the work on the ground.
So some of what else we've been doing, I was on the committee for a housing needs analysis for our city, along with community partners and a contractor from LCOG. Identified that as it happens, we do have enough buildable land within our urban growth boundary. So phase 2 on that is going to be developing new and improved methods for incentivizing that development. We've been able to update our buildable lands inventory. And I had the opportunity to participate on the House Bills 2001 and 2003 rulemaking advisory committees, which were very informative. I was asked to speak on those a little. I would say that those 2 rulemaking committees were highly informative and a great opportunity to cross-pollinate the experiences and ideas of the larger cities with the smaller cities, with the medium cities, and kind of identify where the differences are in what we need and where those similarities are, and to draw ideas off of each other. I think one of the big things that was taken away out of the rulemaking advisory committee was the awareness that not all cities in Oregon are largely flat land. In our coastal cities, we have a lot of challenging geography, which played into certainly our housing needs analysis and our buildable lands inventory. And then other components related to how those rules are going to be devised. There was some thoughts that parking is less of a necessity in some of these areas with higher mass transit options, but our smaller communities, we know we might have 2 cars per household because there is no mass transit. And also, coming from one of the medium cities, I got to learn more about quadplexes, about townhomes, about cottage clusters. And then throughout the entire experience and the entire process, there was a strong focus on equity because it's not unique to any part of the United States that there's historically a level of inequity across cultural lines, racial lines, economic lines. And there was a strong drive throughout the entire process to ensure that whatever is created has equitable and positive outcomes across all demographic spectrums, be it rich, poor, and cultural, race, whichever. Oh, and one last part was on how we determine how much housing is available. I provided strong encouragement that they reach out to the resources available through their community care organizations, so that because those organizations are going to have stronger and more real-time tracking on homeless populations within regions. And I know that was well received. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that whole rulemaking process. I think it'll be a positive outcome given what everyone's experiences seem to be in it.
You know, I think in conclusion, what we're finding is that working on process, working on requirements, thinking outside the box, working with community partners, we've realized that we currently have on our plates approximately 500 new living units that will be put in place over the next 5 years. That's in addition to the nearly 100 units that have come online in the last 3 years. And again, I said earlier, 2007 to 2009, I don't believe we had a single housing start. So it's been a huge change around. The council just heard this at their last meeting that our housing needs analysis basically paints the picture that we need 608 new living units over the next 20 years. Well, we're well on our way to taking care of that. And I can only assume that it'll cause our city to grow some, because such is not happening outside our city limits and outside the county. So that pressure from out there, people that need a place, will be moving into the city. Then I think we're ready for questions.
Yep.